Welcome to I Caught It on Audio. This is Ride or Die episode 9, The Smashing Pumpkins, ATUM.
Hello and welcome to I Caught It on Audio. Today we are going to be doing our Ride or Die podcast, and we're going to do another revisit with the Smashing Pumpkins. We had originally done their whole catalog out a year ago now, I think. Not sure exactly. It's been a minute, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And they recently came out with the rock opera. And I don't know how you say it.
Autumn.
Yeah,
like the season. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, we're. So yeah, and it was a 3-part release, if I'm not mistaken. 11 songs in each of them. And Zach, why don't you give us a little information on this, and then we'll get going.
Okay, so this was first announced a while back, like a couple years, I believe. And I remember just kind of like rolling my eyes, like, seriously, here we go. A sequel to Melancholy and Machina. What are you thinking, Billy? And of course, at that time, it was I think it was right around or right after when Sear was released in 2020. Right. So it was kind of like coming off of that. And their most recent output, which was, in my mind, and what we addressed in the last podcast, that not so great. A lot of misses, very few hits for let's say probably the last decade of their output, maybe even closer to 2 decades. But it was just kind of like went in my mind and kind of went out, and I sort of ignored it and said, no, I'll see what happens when it comes around. And then the first single came out, Beguiled. And I remember just kind of thinking, yeah, this is, I don't know about this. It had these weird, it was very guitar driven, which, of course is more interesting probably to you guys than the synth stuff, synth pop. And it's interesting to me too, but I like kind of a range of the sounds. I like the synth pop. I like the rock. I like the heavy metal stuff. But yeah, I just kind of like set it aside and kind of forgot about it. And then the first act came out, and I listened to the whole thing through, and I thought, this is okay. It's, I'm not really getting a sense of what the bigger picture is. It would be kind of like going into a museum or an art museum, and you're looking only at like a third of a painting, and so I just kind of like shelved it and put it aside and kind of whatever, just forgot about it, and then it finally, the second act came out, and again, I listened to it once, and I was like, I want to wait for the full thing. So it finally came out on May 5th. It was delayed, I think, by like a week or two for production or whatever. I don't know. There was some sort of limited edition pre-order that was on the tea house, Madame Zuzu's tea emporium or whatever that Billy's wife owns and he co-owns, and this pre-order was like this gigantic vinyl box set, $500, signed by all the band members, and included like an extra 10 tracks on a bonus, bunch of bonus vinyls, and it was. It was this like grandiose thing, and once the release, I didn't buy that, mind you. I'm not willing to spend $500 on the Pumpkins, but when it finally came out, I did decide to buy the CD, because one of the things was, as I was listening to the streaming version on YouTube Music, I was just thinking, well, if I really want the true experience, I want to kind of feel like what things were back when I enjoyed Melancholy or Siamese Dream. You had the physical thing in your hand, and you could look at the booklet and stuff like that. So I went out and I got the CD, and then I realized I don't have anything to play it in. And so I listened to the first disc in the car, and then I tried to,
you plugged the PS5 into the tape deck, and then
yeah,
and radio tuned it in.
It's just so funny how physical media is really not a thing. And now I kind of want to like sell it, and so I don't have to like store it as well. But but no, it's got pretty decent artwork. The booklet doesn't have any lyrics in it, strangely enough. It just has like stuff about the songs, like a little bit of background, just a couple sentence blurbs. So I thought that was kind of cool because what's going on with this album is it's sort of this grandiose concept album, as is in the name, a rock opera in 3 acts. It's just this grandiose sci-fi story about this elderly rock star. And I don't really know what goes on beyond that. I didn't really want to delve too much into the details of the story because it's one of those things. Like I've had the same thing with like Coheed and Cambria. They have these grandiose sci-fi stories. I don't really care that much. It's cool that sort of ties all the songs and the themes together. But to me, it's more about the music. And once I actually dug into the music on this one, I've listened to it over 10 times now, and I think it's a really solid album. I like it. I don't like it, as much as the old stuff. But I think it has a pretty decent place in the Pumpkins discography. And I really like what's going on with how some of the acts function a little bit differently than the other ones. And it all really flows together well. I mean, it's like about over 2.5 hours worth of music, somewhere around there. And it doesn't feel like it. When I'm listening to it, it flows really, really well from start to finish. It has some smaller, like softer sides, some more acoustic-y type of stuff. It has some more driving, like really heavy stuff with like really chugging guitars. It has some definite synth pop kind of ballady type things. But overall, my take is I really like it, and I think I even like it more than Sear than I liked Sear before this. So I'm wondering what you guys think about it. Let's start with you, Dave. What are your thoughts on this massive 33 song epic?
Well, I was reluctant to get into this one. It did not appeal to me because the last few Smashing Pumpkins entries were pretty mediocre. As we talked about in the last podcast, they're not my style. It's too much of the synth pop, too much. Just my synth can be good, but what I fear will happen is it's just someone who has no one to play with in their studio recording layer on layer on layer of synth and synth and synth and synth. And when it gets to that, it loses all utility to me.
Yeah.
This honestly didn't feel like that for most of it. There are a few songs here and there where there's like laser sound effects. I don't remember which track it was, but and extra things that just didn't need to be on the track. And had they not been there, the track would have been decent. Yeah. But that aside, I thought there were some awesome rock songs on this album. I really liked and this one was more of the acoustic, but Springtimes was just a great song. I would listen to that one over and over because I wanted to get more and more into it. So it just had this. It started off with the synth, or I don't know what instrument exactly, and then it switches moods to an acoustic guitar, and then the electric guitar solos over top of it, and it's got this deep bass rumblings in it, and it's a really, really, really well written song, I thought. I think overall, this is, I would say, it's top 5 Pumpkins albums for me. Dan, where are you sitting on this one?
So I think that this is definitely a step better than my memory of much of the new to me Pumpkins albums, last handful of albums. Mm-hmm. I'm just checking here. Oh yeah, I am dumb. I took notes for every single song. Like my last listen through, I just sat there with a notebook. And you mentioned Springtime. I was like, oh, let me see what I thought of that. And on that one, I wrote the wrong title. So I was like, "Where is it?" No, I found it. I like that. Oh, no. I did not like that one. Springtimes. I thought,
and again, I'm fine with you being wrong about your opinion. But
yeah, my opinion is wrong. The thing, my note on that one is that the guitar doesn't really gel with the synths very well on that one for me.
now, see, I had a lot of trouble with that one at first too, but I think it's a transition piece. It's the end of the second act. We're going from the synth. I think the second act's kind of synth heavy, if I'm not mistaken, and then in the third act, it shifts to more mellow, and I think it's a good transition piece for that.
Yeah, if my memory serves, that does sort of switch to more guitar heavy as the track goes on. But yeah, I would. This is, like you said, Zach. This is a mix of. I would say there's 4 styles on this. 3 main ones. You got the synth, which is more of the recent, Billy obsession, and then you've got like the sort of like traditional Pumpkins, like alt rock sound, and then you've got the sort of more metal, type sound, sort of like more like the song Zero, off of Melancholy. That sound, that sort of like, chugging and, palm muting and stuff. And then the last category is just like goofy weirdness, like a song like Hooray.
Yeah.
My note for Hooray is this an Owl City song?
My note for Hooray was probably exactly what they wanted it to be. I hated it.
Yeah.
Sounded like the worst part of the musical.
Yeah, I had that. Yeah, is it an Owl City song? This is weird, but the outro was my favorite part of that one. There were a couple other ones that were just goofy, which is fine. It's especially if you're doing a rock opera. It makes sense. I did all those things. I think predominantly the first 3. But he did have a nicer mix than Sear was a little synth heavy. I think my complaints about the synth songs is not that I dislike them for the most part. I find them pleasant but kind of forgettable and samey sounding. Like the fewer I hear, the more I like them. But when I start, when there's, I don't know, there's probably at least a dozen like synth driven songs on this out of the 33. And by the end, my notes were stuff like, is this the same synth sound from earlier? And, oh, this synthy sound again. Okay. And that might be a matter of time and they might step out more. But the other thing that I often noticed with the synth songs is Billy is singing not particularly memorable melodies, and they're all in the same like tone range, like the same 3 or 4 notes. And I found I had trouble telling the songs apart the further I got through the album. So I really have nothing negative to say about the synth stuff. There's very few of those that I disliked, but there's very few of those that jumped out at me. That's for sure.
So what about Jimmy's drumming? How did you guys feel about that?
I was very happy when he was drumming.
When he cut loose, it was fucking fantastic.
Yeah. I think the culling had some pretty good drum stuff going on there. Intergalactic had a whole bunch of drumming going on there. Yep. And you could definitely tell because I'm not saying that he didn't play. Yep, Moss. Definitely Moss. Moss is one of my favorite ones. Yeah,
absolutely.
But like you can definitely tell because it's I'm not saying he didn't play the drums on the whole album, but I think what may have happened is like, he gets behind the drum kit, they record all of his his tracks, and then maybe Billy goes in there and just starts like turning off like the hi-hats or something, because that's one of the biggest things I noticed is like on I can't remember which one, I think it was Intergalactic maybe, or it might have been the culling, but there's all these like little tiny like really subtle hi-hat hits, where it's like little type of stuff, and that then but the vast majority of the songs it's just like much, just like it could be done by a robot, and
Right.
I don't understand really if that's what Billy's going for when he wants to produce it that way, or if he's just, I don't get it. Like I really feel as if Jimmy is not all there, when he shows up, it's like, yay, Jimmy's back,
Right.
but then on the rest of the songs, it's just kind of like, where's Jimmy? Where's my Jimmy?
Well, I heard a little interview at some point a while back. I think it was around Sear era, where Jimmy said, "Hey, we want to do different things. I want to try different stuff." And it was basically sort of a defense of probably people's older fans bitching about their sound and the sort of like drum, the sort of like looped drum beat feel that is more common, these days. And he basically said, we don't want to do the same thing, or I don't want to do the same thing over and over again. There were a few songs on that I made note of where it's clearly real drums.
Yeah.
Like you can tell, but at the same time, it's entirely robotic. There's almost no fills. And it's like there was one song, I can't remember which, but it was literally just bass on 1, snare on 3, the entire song. And I was like, what? Yeah. What's going on? Like, I don't know. Like you should do what you want when you're writing, and I understand the desire to change, but man, what a loss to these songs. Another good example, Beguiled.
Yeah.
Why did we need that like Casio keyboard snare sound at the intro? Yeah. Like whenever it dropped off to just the guitar and it was like, doom, doom, it was like the really crappy fake sounding like drum loop. I was like, and then the drums come in and you're like, oh yeah, why don't you just do that with like a rim shot or something,
exactly.
Or like a stick hit or something. I don't know. But when he cuts loose, you're like, awesome. Like this is, I love Billy's side of the band and James, and when Darcy back in the old days was allowed to, do stuff, I'm sure she contributed as well. But I mean, the secret sauce for the Pumpkins is the drumming.
Without a doubt.
And it's really there sometimes, and then sometimes it's non-existent, and sometimes he's doing it, but maybe it's his personal choice or what Billy's asking him to do. I don't know, but it seems like a missed opportunity for me.
Well, because you think of bands like Rush or Tool, and it's like they have such a great rhythm section, and the drummer is so incredible. It's like you don't mute those tracks. You don't turn those tracks off or replace it with a drum machine,
Right.
So it like, even if Billy wanted something robotic sounding or whatever, I feel like you always get Jimmy behind that kit and you get him to do something and you just let him loose, let him do his thing. And if it doesn't work, push him in a different direction or something, ask him to try something new.
Think about 1979 on Melancholy. Those are pretty robotic drums. I mean, it's a cool drum part, but he's not doing fills and like the jazzy, feel stuff like he's doing in like Cherub Rock or Muzzle, or I'm only referencing old songs because those are the ones I really care about. You can see here, but like he's not going crazy on 1979. He's playing a really straightforward, almost robotic track, but it's still kind of great, it's really precise, but like it's kind of the perfect thing. He could be doing stuff like that, but again, I don't know if it's his choice. Maybe he's leaning into what Billy would like him to do. Maybe he's just bored playing, cool drum rolls. I don't know. He certainly does it sometimes on this album, but not as much as he could.
What about what do you guys think about the lyrical content? To me, there were times where it was very poetic and natural and even like Shakespearean, like elegance. And then there were some major oof moments like Embracer, where I realized, said the knife to the spoon. It's like, what?
He's always had some bizarre stuff in his lyrics.
Yeah.
A
starway, where rain must fall, a starway to the stars. It's just, I mean, it wasn't like terrible, but it was just like, is this really working for what you're trying to evoke? I don't know. I mean, there were times when it really worked great. Like I love the syncopated chorus, a female backing chorus on like Pacer. Where like she's saying something that's kind of like has this weird rhythmic echo going on, and Billy is saying something like if in the heart or something like that, and she says something else that kind of like reverberates in the background. I thought that was really cool and very unique and different. I can't really pick out what she was saying, but I had to go and look up the lyrics. But I thought that was kind of cool, like how they were doing kind of some of the lyrical motifs.
Yeah. I deliberately didn't go look up the lyrics after we just went through Weezer Seasons.
Yeah.
And the lyrics were terrible in that one. Like 28 songs, maybe 3 were listenable lyrics. And so I didn't deliberately go listen to the lyrics. So I let myself not understand it and just listen to the singing for its for that aspect of it. But the stuff that I could grab onto, I didn't have any major problems with, other than like the palindrome thing that he was. That's kind of stuck wrong in me. And then all of Hooray, every aspect of Hooray, I don't ever need to hear again.
You really did not like that one, huh?
I did not like that one.
So in the little booklet, it was talking about how it's like some of the characters are going to this like defunct like carnival amusement park or something. Like. Yeah. So I mean, it got what it was going for, I think.
Yeah, and that's why I said it's probably exactly what they wanted the song to sound like. I just hate it.
Yeah.
I would say the lyrics for the most part didn't jump out. I do remember the palindrome thing, because I was like, that's a weird thing to sort of repeat here, but okay. I also found one of the songs I really disliked was Sojourner.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think it was the lyrics, it was how he pronounced Sojourner in the song. He kept saying "I Sojenna," or something like that, and I found it very distracting and annoying. So that was one of my least favorite songs.
That's the one that had palindrome in it.
Is that in that one also? I'd believe it. I did not like that one. That was on my shit list for this rock opera. But the Weezer thing was, you couldn't. It was too audible. It was too awkward.
Yeah.
And just didn't sound interesting. This, it all kind of mixed in the back. But if you go look through the lyrics of the songs that you love from the 90s, you find some stuff where you're like, that's awkward, but all right,
absolutely,
absolutely. And I don't feel like there's a big drop off for the most part in this album from his previous lyrics for me.
No, I agree. It's not categorically worse than the stuff that I listened to affectionately from the 90s. There's absolutely.
I do think he sang the word zero too many times.
A lot.
All over the place.
Zero, I know it's a character, right?
Yeah, yeah, but you don't need to evoke that all the time, Yeah.
Well,
so one of the things I was thinking about is it's given that this is a sequel to Melancholy and Machina, I'm kind of surprised that there aren't any either lyrical motifs or musical phrases that we brought back from that era, just something little that's and I'm not saying like fan service member berries type stuff, but I'm saying like bring something back to the fold that it like, that's what that area is referencing or referring back to, because when it's this completely separate entity, it feels like it's too far out there, and I don't really know, what's the connection supposed to be. You said that you noticed some references.
There were some lyrical references,
okay,
like Deus Ex Machina and stuff like that.
Oh, right, yeah.
And then the whole Zero thing. I mean, Zero is a character from Melancholy.
Yeah.
Also, so.
Yeah, I mean, the Zero is the one that jumped out. I know Glass is the character in Machina. And
yes.
I don't remember hearing Glass very often. And I think he's supposed to be named Shiny now, which was confusing to me because Shiny and Oh So Bright, that makes me wonder if that's what that was about.
I think it was. Yeah. It's supposed to be this elderly, like 70 or 80-year-old old rock musician god, probably what kind of like a future embodiment of what Billy is.
Yeah.
And from what I gathered from the story and stuff is like he's on his ship called Autumn, and he's been living on that for like 2 decades or whatever out in space because he's been exiled from the world, something along those lines. I don't know. It's but yeah, Shiny is definitely the character, and he previously referred to as Glass and previously referred to as Zero before that.
Yeah.
So it's all the same character, just with different names.
And your comparison to Coheed and Cambria is apt. I know it's very elaborate, and there's a story in there, but I don't care or ever figured out the details, and it does not reduce the enjoyment of the music.
It's like it's just esoteric enough for me to not get it, you know, like it's right on the line of you know, is sort of like it's, I don't know, it's like it's all from his head and he gets it, and that's fine. And then everybody else just kind of interprets it their own way. Although I will say this, while I was listening to this a couple times, I had like this visions of Billy on Broadway doing this whole thing, you know, like in all these different get-ups and stuff. And I kind of want him to turn it into a Broadway musical.
Honestly, it feels like that's what he's going for.
Even if he just did it like a one-off, like he's doing the full thing one time only, boom. I think that would be so amazing.
The video for Beguiled was very much in that sort of operatic, you know, sort of visual mode. There was a lot of sort of costuming and stuff. Speaking of Beguiled, the first thing that we said after you sent me the link for it, Zach, was, hey, isn't that Harvester of Sorrow from Justice for All Metallica? It's the same riff.
It really
except
is.
for the song doesn't change as much. And the riff is very, very, it's a cool sounding riff. I mean, it's very derivative of that, but you know, whatever. Everyone steals from everybody. It's okay. But it repeated a lot in that song, and that song didn't work as well for me for that reason.
I think it's better in the context of the album where it's positioned, and I do really like the soloing on it.
Yes.
I think the kind of layered solos with the harmonizing is pretty interesting.
Drums are great on that one.
So what were you guys' favorite song? Like, if you picked one song from this whole collection of 33, what would you say it is?
Mine, as I said earlier, would be Springtimes, with a close second with Moss.
Okay.
I also liked, let's see what else I have. I liked the little intro, Autumn.
Yeah,
song. I thought that was a
Pink
fun,
Floyd type of feel to it. Yeah,
that was for me. That was an overture for the album, not in musical themes or lyrical themes. I was there was no lyrics, but in sort of tones. It had a little bit of to hint at everything that you're going to hear sonically for the next 32 songs.
It's set up. Exactly that. Yeah. This is where we're going with this album. So buckle up, because it's going to be a wild ride. And there were a couple other good ones. I liked Avalanche. I liked Empires. The Culling. Yeah, that was good. But yeah, I would say my favorite is Springtime. Springtime and Moss stood out for me as the best two.
As I mentioned, Springtime didn't work for me as well. My list of good songs, I rated them as good, meh, and I did not like that. My good ones are Autumn, The Good and Goodbye. I really liked, and then I also like Avalanche and Empires and Moss. Those I think the second act, the middle third, was my favorite.
I think so too.
And then Space Age was cool. And so was Every Morning. And then I also liked In Lieu of Failure, Cenotaph, I don't know how you pronounce that. And then Intergalactic was, I thought it was a slight letdown, a dragging part in the sort of back third of Intergalactic. But overall, I thought that was a really cool, big, epic Pumpkin song. Those are my favorites. Which specific one, I don't know. Those are the 10 songs that I was like, yes, I like that. If you burned me that album, I'd be like, wow, this is really good Latter-day Pumpkins. Like, you know, like you said, Dave, you know, this is maybe in their top 5. I would say that if I trimmed those out, that would be in the top 5. And then I had about 10 songs I didn't like, and then the other 13 were like, oh, pretty good, like not doesn't jump out, but yeah, nothing to complain about.
Good enough, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, like totally fine.
How about you, Zach? Which ones stood out for you?
I absolutely loved Night Waves. That one, it's something about the melodies that he sings, but also like the really jangly, echoey guitar rhythms, which I'm pretty sure it's guitar. I mean, it could very well be keyboard synth as well. But there was like a very like almost identical to some Kraftwerk song, an arpeggio, I think at the beginning of it that it rubs me the wrong way. And in fact, I think that's kind of one of his downfalls when he's doing the synth stuff is if you're going to do an arpeggio, like do something interesting with it, have it bounce around in weird ways that hasn't happened before. Don't just go up and down and have it loop over and over and over again.
That's exactly it. On Night Waves, my note is this is samey sounding. Like I feel like it wasn't original. If I heard it before all the other synth stuff, I might have liked it more.
Yeah. So if he would have kind of downgraded the arpeggios, it would have been even better song for me. But I really, really like that one. And then Moss was hugely. I just love the groove. The groove is so great. And I made a note that the soloing is fantastic in a cheap kind of way, because it's really like. Normally if I heard that in some other like pop rock song, I'd be like, this is not good because it's really simplistic soloing, but it just works for the song and it's just such a great like driving groove. I really, really like that one. And I agree with you guys. I think the second act is the strongest of all of them. I think from start to finish, it really just has the nice arc going there.
Yeah, I had for a couple of songs, my note was, is this a really good Pumpkins like riff, or am I just starved for Pumpkins riffs, period, like guitar riffs? I wasn't sure, but I liked it, and I have that specifically on Empires, where I was like, this is awesome. It reminded me of Muse a little bit. But I was like, is it just anything where Billy Corgan's voice plus a Pumpkins sounding riff, it makes me really happy? I think so. And my note on Moss also was, hey, the vocals are different sounding. Like, because I was running into a lot of
finally
this, you could move vocals, so you could swap vocals and songs and they would work feeling, especially on the synthy stuff. And that there was a little bit of vocal change there. And I think when you mentioned earlier, Zach, that they were getting some background singers involved, I thought that I'm not a huge fan of background singers, broadly speaking. It feels like a little like latter day Pink Floyd, like sort of a cheap shortcut for prog-ish sounding, gospel prog, but which is the weirdest description for Pink Floyd I think I've ever come up with.
Gospel prog, yeah. That's what Waters was going for.
Yeah, and then they really sort of embraced it as sort of a shortcut, after Waters left, I think, like, we got to have some female backing vocals here. But it was different, and I think when it's 33 tracks and a lot of your vocal lines don't stand out from each other, I think you really get excited about something different.
Yeah.
Now, speaking of the vocals, what are you guys' thoughts on the quality of Billy's voice at this point in his career? It's something that we've been talking about with the U2 in our Is This Song Good series, and we touched on it with Rivers in our last Ride or Die.
I think he's a better singer. Like he's more competent in singing, but I think it's definitely losing some of the smoothness. It's got, well, I don't know. Cause I mean, like he used to really do that growl, snarly raspiness back in the day. And that's also something that I kind of miss. I wish he would bring that back because I really want that kind of snarling. And yeah, like you said, it is very, very samey throughout the whole thing. Yeah. But Dan, what do you think about his voice now?
Well, he's 56, and Rivers was like early 50s, and Bono was early 60s. Right. So they're all kind of getting close to that range. I think his voice sounds good for what he's trying to do. You're right. I think I didn't really think about sort that out when I was thinking about how his singing was going as I was listening, because that popped into my head like, oh, actually sounds pretty good. But it seems like he's really narrowed his what he's trying to do. He doesn't do the snarling or the screaming anymore, and that's hard on your voice, so fair enough.
Yeah, absolutely.
Also, I'm getting less of the really like swooning falsetto-y stuff, which I love. He has such a distinctive, and I can understand someone saying annoying voice. I've never felt that way, but I started to feel that way a bit more recently with this stuff, not because it's bad, but because it's monotonous and it's sort of what he's trying to do.
There's only so much of that you can take.
It's very nasally, which, that cuts through nicely, but you don't really need that cut through when you don't have like 64 guitars stacked up on Soma or
Right.
Rocket, or Today. You don't need to cut through. So you're cutting through synths pretty easy here, Billy. You don't really need to have that style as much. But yeah, his voice is still there. It's not like with Bono, I was like, oh, yikes. You need to change your approach if you want to, like, I'm cool with, like old, sort of like a more Leonard Cohen, or Johnny Cash, switch over to weathered, booze and cigarettes voice. You got to admit that that's where you need to go. And I don't feel like he's admitted that to himself yet. It's not in that range, but I don't get as much joy out of his vocals as I used to.
Yeah, I think almost because I was just thinking about like how great Disarm is and how he sings that one on Siamese Dream, and I think what it maybe comes down to is he pushed out a lot more passion in his singing back then, and I think now it's maybe a little bit more by the numbers. It's just like, okay, well, I got to do a vocal track. Here we go, boom, boom, boom. Get it done. Right. Oh, I got to make sure I'm singing in key. And I think back in those days, it was more about like he was trying to get an emotion out there and an emotion across in the music, and I think that's much more relatable. And I'm not going to like begrudge him as a musician and stuff, because it's like you got to get stuff done and make things work. But I'd kind of prefer that type of singing where like you just go into the booth and you just pour your heart out, rather than like, oh, well, I got to get this track done because there's 32 more waiting in the waiting in the wings.
That's a great point. That's a great point, because no one could ever say that he's a technically or traditionally, great singer. He just isn't. But what he did do back, starting with Gish, was found a way to take advantage of his voice by doing unconventional things to express emotion very strongly. He found a way to do that. And I don't know that he's doing that anymore. Now he just has a distinctive but non-passionate voice. And that's maybe on a 10 album, a 10-track album that works well, but there was just not enough variety for me on this one. Dave, what do you have? Anything else?
Oh, you guys nailed it all. He definitely doesn't have the emotion that I loved from Melancholy and Siamese Dream. The stuff that made those songs just so powerful.
I need Into the Eyes of the Jackal, I say kaboom every once in a while.
The world is a vampire.
Yeah. That's kind of how he sings now, everything, just with a little less venom.
Right, exactly.
He's in that vocal range all the time, but and that song, it jumped out because it was like solo voice opening to the song, and it really cut through, and it was like, ooh, okay. But now it's like just lay it on top of some synths, and it sounds much like the song that I heard before. Yeah.
And I wonder how much of it is, you're not the young punk rock star trying to make a name for yourself anymore, and you're this guy who's successful, and there's been no shortage of success for the Smashing Pumpkins, and you don't have that edge in your body anymore. It's just gone, because now you're comfortable. It's like when a rapper is no longer a rapper and becomes a police officer on a TV show because they're happy. They've got comfort and money, and they don't have that edge that they had when they were young.
Are you saying he's past his cop killer phase at this point?
He might be a little bit. Billy Corgan might be past the cop killer.
He's on his SVU phase at this point.
Yeah.
All right. That's actually quite apt, I think, now that I say it out loud.
I was watching a little interview that he did recently this morning on YouTube, and he was talking about how, in the early days when people told him, no, don't do that. That's not gonna work out. That's a bad idea. And he ignored them and did it. And then it was successful. That's sort of, he was saying that it kind of gave him license to kind of go his own way and do his own thing. And I think that's great. But I also think you still need to have either your own voice in your head or other people telling you like, hey, let's try this, let's try that. Like, you can't be so full of yourself that you're never going to listen to other people's opinions. And that's kind of what he was saying in the interview. It's like, I don't really care what anybody says because I did bad things before and it turned out okay for me. So I'm done. That's all that matters.
We've talked about this a lot before, but anytime you see that the album was self-produced, I always, sometimes it works great. White Stripes, it worked amazing. Smashing Pumpkins, he needs that extra voice in there, you know. The best Smashing Pumpkins albums are ones that have a producer in the room to balance it out. So.
Right.
Yep. You know, I was just looking here. I'm guessing that Zeitgeist is where. No, that was produced with Terry Date, which makes sense because it's super heavy. He's a metal dude, you know. Like, I think he might have produced on like Slayer and you know. And stuff like that.
Yeah.
But so Zeitgeist was that. But I'm just looking for when he transitioned over to everything by himself, because he got a co-producer on all the way up through Monuments to an Elegy. Was it Shiny? No, Rick Rubin was that. Rick Rubin was the producer on Shiny? That's right. We talked about that.
Yeah.
It started with Sear, which is where we were like, this is I don't know. My memory is that was the worst one. I don't know if that's actually accurate or not. But Dak, you liked that one, right? Because it leans into the synth.
One. I felt it was a little too heavy on songs. Like, it didn't need to have that many songs, but I was perfectly okay with the synth, and I liked a lot of the stuff that he was doing on it. But I've always liked the synth pop stuff. Like, I was in love with his Future Embrace solo album that was all synth and him only. Mm-hmm. But like you guys were saying before, to me, Sear is really just another Billy Corgan solo album. I mean, he's got you know, all the other people playing on it, so it says in the liner notes, but it really feels like it's his thing. If it's going to be the Smashing Pumpkins, I feel like, you know, you should have more of the band sound. Like, you can certainly add in synths and stuff here and there, but
of course,
at least make it sound like everybody's playing an instrument at some point, you know.
Yeah, and of course he can do whatever he wants. He's got enough money. And you know, he's written classic albums and a bunch of like forever songs on the radio, so he can do what he wants. It's clearly his band, you know. It always has been. He's always been driving the bus. I do think that having a second voice makes better art when it comes to music. For listenability, you know, maybe Autumn is higher art than Gish. I don't know, but I'd rather listen to Gish. I can tell you that much. So I don't know. Like, to me, having that second, like you said, Dave, when a band transitions to, we're going to self-produce everything, I'm like, well, okay.
Well, I'm sure it makes sense from a business standpoint, because if you don't have to pay Rick Rubin to come in and do his producing thing, then you're gonna save some money and make more once you actually release it.
Sure.
I did have a chance to listen to the 10 extra tracks that are called Zodion at Crystal Hall, and man, there are some bangers on there. It's actually pretty decent. Like, I thought it was just going to be kind of like B-side extra junk, and there are a couple on there that felt kind of like Aeroplane Flies High level of quality.
Let me get out my $500 and go buy that then.
Well, I mean, I think they said it was going to be available about a year after the release, so probably like next May it should show up on streaming services. I'm assuming
that'll be good.
But also in the interview I was listening to this morning, he said that they had about 80 songs lined up that they were working on when they whittled it down to 33. Yep. So it's very likely that we're going to get more Pumpkins very soon.
You know who, every time there's a band, well, this is true with Weezer, it was true with
Chili Peppers.
Chili Peppers, where they're just like, we have 100 songs. I'm always like, uh-oh.
Uh-oh.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Like,
that means you have 95 bad songs.
well, and then they end up, so they had what? You said 80 songs?
Yeah, 80 something.
They put out 43, and I feel like 20 track. If you made this album, say 20 to 25 tracks, Autumn, if you included all out of the 43 songs, you chose the best 2/3, you'd have a really good album, and maybe you shook up the variety of the sound a little bit. But instead, they're just like, nah, let's go maximalist, because look how many songs we have. Weezer's always that way. We're like, oh, we wrote a ton of songs, and I'm like, well, you should have taken ideas from the 100 songs and mushed them together so these songs weren't so forgettable. And that's certainly true of latter day Red Hot Chili Peppers, where you're like, cool, like none of these are bad. And that's how I feel about this, the way I feel about sort of Stadium Arcadium. I'm like, there aren't any real bad songs on here. And there's also a full album of great songs, but you had to put out 30 songs.
Right.
So it dilutes the product. And I don't know, I feel like self-editing, whether it's in production or in choices for how many songs go on the album, would probably benefit these bands.
Yeah. Well, in this case with Autumn, I'm not that, I'm okay with the number of songs on this. There are definitely a couple like Hooray and what was it? I think like To the Grays. There were a couple in there that I was just kind of like, but it's sort of, when you're doing this kind of rock opera thing, it's kind of, you're going from one thing to another thing, and it's essentially telling a story. So yeah, not all the chapters are going to be good, but I think it works the way that they have it. I don't really feel like they needed to remove anything and try and cut it down.
Yeah, typically I'm with you, Dan, on that. We're definitely in the Stadium Arcadium.
Oh yeah, I am too.
Example, and we talked about this with these seasons for Weezer. You put out a typical 40-minute Weezer album made from the best songs of Seasons, and you've got actually a really good album. But and I agree with you on this one, Zach, that it feels like there's a story being told, and you've got to get through all of the it may be a little longer than it needed to be, maybe cut it down to 30, maybe 28, I don't know. But he definitely put in the songs he wanted to put in because he wanted to tell a story, and all the parts were necessary for the story that he was telling. So I get it in the rock opera setting. But yeah, if you're just putting out a rock album, this shouldn't be longer than 25 songs at the absolute most.
In that regard, I'm sure you're right. I don't know what the story is, but like if he was trying to get the story told, that makes sense on that level. But from a purely listening enjoyment, I found it was a bit repetitive. I don't know. Maybe it's the fact that pretty much every song was a full song. I know that sounds kind of weird, but like if you look at probably one of the more successful rock opera, double albums, The Wall, I think about 10 or 12 of those are not songs, really.
I think you mean Bat Out of Hell too.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah. Well, that's listen. We should probably cover that at some point. But
we should.
Are you setting up Meatloaf, Zach?
No, I'm not done with that.
So yeah, I would say that if some of these songs were just like a minute long and just told some story, I think it would tighten up the album more for me.
Yeah.
I just found the fact that there's 33 different songs, like from the story perspective, that may make a ton of sense. But from an enjoyment perspective, I was like, there's a lot of songs that sound very similar to each other. And I think, I don't know, maybe album 3 is better than I give it credit for, because I was just sort of like, okay, more of this, like, I don't know, like, and also maybe just more time with it would make me feel better. I did want to mention that, it's a challenge to come up with song titles. And some of these feel like Hooray and huzzah and stuff like that sound like he's just running out of ideas, which is understandable. I mean, he's got hundreds of songs out there.
I'm a hooligan.
I did want to point out that Harmageddon might be one of the worst song titles I've ever heard in my life.
Animal Crackers.
Well, yes, okay, fair enough. But Harmageddon is that's truly awful.
Yeah,
and also
it's not good.
I think we can stop naming songs Excelsior. I don't know why that's a thing, but I've heard a lot of songs called Excelsior over the years. And, anyway.
Well, also, that's from the bonus album. So
right, that's bonus album
give him
stuff.
A little bit more leeway.
And I also feel like, while I'm looking at the track listing, Necromance is not my favorite pun in the world. Also one that's been made many times. But anyway, Harmageddon stuck out to me as, for the most part, these are decent song titles, but Harmageddon's pretty bad here. So I wanted to mention one more quick thing here. And Zach, you can sort of fact check me, but Iha's back, right? James Iha's back on guitar, and he was on Seer also, right?
I believe so. Yeah.
So I don't remember a whole lot of James Iha flavor on Seer, but I did notice there were some sort of distinctive Iha-y guitar solos floating around on this one. Is that basically? Do I have that right? It's been a while since I focused on Seer.
Yeah.
That's what I got from it too.
You're right. It's really hard to pick out anything other than Billy on Seer. That's why I consider it to be, another solo album from him, even though it's a Pumpkins record. But definitely on Autumn, we've got more stuff there. I think sometimes it's hard to differentiate. Like, I'm pretty sure the Moss one might be a Jeff Schroeder one.
Yep. And Billy solos too. So it could be him,
It's hard to kind of, to really pick out exactly who's doing what, but yeah, no, there's definitely some Iha there. There's definitely some Schroeder there. Yeah. And then occasional Jimmy drumming.
Well, and I don't mind Billy being the predominant force behind the band. It's kind of the way it's always been, but I like it when you get different flavors to mix it up.
Yep, absolutely.
And it's really nice to have James Iha feel like he's adding to the sound, and also letting Jeff Schroeder add some too. That's pretty cool. I just, and Jimmy does on about 10 tracks. You're like, oh, fuck yeah, Jimmy Chamberlain. Yeah. And then there's a bunch where you're like, well, I could play this drum part, or if it even is being played.
Yeah.
But
I've got a keyboard here. I can tap out some. Yeah. So last time you guys were both not Ride or Die, and exactly. I was Ride or Die. So where are we sitting on this one? Let's start with you, Dave.
Well, this one brought me back towards being Ride or Die. I definitely don't have any interest in the monotony of the middle 2000s, 2010s synth boringness. That doesn't interest me at all, but I definitely like the way they're going with this. Yeah, it's a lot of music all at once, but I love the sound of several of these tracks, so I was pleasantly surprised. How about you, Dan?
Yeah, this is much like Weezer, where it showed me the stuff I like, more stuff that I like than I remember from the previous set of albums, but also still had a presence of stuff I don't like as much. I do think that I found more enjoyment in this, and it feels like a step forward. I think, I'm still not Ride or Die, but I know he can write songs that I like still. And
it's good to hear. Yeah, it's good to hear that there's songs coming out that are enjoyable again,
Yep. Yeah. And, that's the way with most bands. It's very hard to find a band who puts out, 10 plus albums where you're like, these are the vast majority are pretty great. Like, that's hard to find. So it's a standard that's tough to meet. But the drop for me from my favorite albums to this is still quite precipitous, even if this is a step back towards stuff that I like a little bit more. I'm still not Ride or Die. But I enjoyed this more than I thought I might when we started focusing in on this.
How about you, Zach?
Yeah, when it first when it first was coming down the pipe and stuff, and the way it was released, I was skeptical. I wasn't sure, and I was kind of leaning towards here we go again, more of the same. But once I actually gave it a chance and really like lived with it for a good solid week, I'm definitely I loved it. I enjoyed the time I had with it, and it's very memorable. And I'll continue to listen to it in the future. Not so much right now, because I've listened to it so much in the last week or so. But I will definitely revisit it again in the not too distant future. And I'm still ride or die Pumpkins. Whatever comes next, I'm gonna be there. I'm gonna be lining up for it. Well, not lining up for it, but I'll be.
You'll be at your keyboard, prepared to do what needs to be done.
I'll get it eventually. Yeah.
All right. Well, if you've listened this far, clearly you enjoyed it. Please like, subscribe, and then tell us your favorite Smashing Pumpkins song in the comments. Up next, we are going to be doing a 4-part series on the band Aerosmith, covering their, what did it add up to? I think 15 studio albums, plus a whole bunch of bonus material. So wherever you listened to this, you'll be able to find that there. And we also have 8 more episodes that we've done prior to this. So go ahead and check those out too. And thanks for listening.
I caught it on audio.